Hello, Lolsters, aspiring authors. We have Harini Nagendra, right, today. And interestingly, she's into both fiction and non-fiction. And we're going to really have a nice time talking to her. And Dhanya will introduce her formally.
Thank you. Harini Nagendra is a professor of ecology at Azim Premji University and a well-known public speaker and writer on issues of nature and sustainability. She is internationally recognized for her scholarship on sustainability with honors that include the 2009 Cozzarelli Prize from the US National Academy of Sciences, the Elinor Ostrom Senior Scholar Award 2013, and the 2017 Clarivate Web of Science Award for interdisciplinary research in India. Her nonfiction books include Nature in the City, Bengaluru in the Past, Present and Future, and 2 books co-authored with Seema Mundoli, So Many Leaves and Cities and Canopies, Trees in Indian Cities, which received the 2020 Publishing Next Awards for Best English Nonfiction Book in India, and was featured on the 2021 Green Literature Festival's honor list. The Bangalore Detectives Club is her first crime fiction novel. Harini lives in Bangalore with her family in a home filled with maps. She loves trees, mysteries, and traditional recipes. We welcome you, Harini. We're very happy to have you here.
Another tree lover. Welcome.
Yeah.
I'm
a very
one.
varied and very unique profile.
Indeed. Yeah. So especially, yeah, I will ask one question later. Before that, as planned, we will begin with the question. So how was it to, go from non-fiction to fiction? That's where we will start. We will cover many. So as an author, how was it to transit from non-fiction to fiction? Harini.
Okay, I should start by saying that it was first an earlier transition for me from fiction to non-fiction, though not at book length, because ever since I can remember, as a very young child, I used to write. I was in Delhi and we used to have the Shankar's International Children's Competitions, and so I used to enter them every year. I won some medals when I was 8 and 9 for short stories. I wrote for local magazines and newspapers. All the way to my PhD, I used to write these Sundays, newspaper stories for children that were published on Sunday newspapers like the Hindu and the Deccan Herald. And then I got busy with my research, and I also, when I was at Indiana University doing postdoctoral work, I took some creative writing classes, and I published a short story in a literary magazine online. And then I left all of that. And then in 2016, I started writing my non-fiction books, and then started writing a lot of non-fiction for newspapers, which is op-eds and shorter pieces. And that then transitioning to fiction became very difficult. I didn't find the fiction to non-fiction at all, but the non-fiction to fiction was very difficult because when I write, I'll get any newspaper is tight for space. So they'll tell you 600 words or 800 words. And if you have 620 words, they will choose which to cut. And they always choose the wrong.
I know, been there, seen that.
Yeah, so it's you edit as you go. I start with long sentences because I tend to type long, and then I look at the first 3 sentences, I type them short. I get into a zone where I'm making one linear argument, which is crisp. Choice of every word is important, and if I can use 10 words instead of 20, I cut the sentences down. And that was very difficult to switch off that voice in my head when I moved to fiction, because you have to let your imagination wander, right? If you're constantly saying, why am I using 5 words to depict the scene? I just say it was rainy instead of saying this is how the wind made her feel and this is how she was cold and she shivered. It could be a very boring fiction book. Right?
I know. Was it? Yeah. The first one, was it because it was children? As in, you were writing for children, that kind of fiction?
No.
Oh, okay. Adults, okay.
Yeah.
So it was easier there than this. So 2 transitions you had. It was easier in
the first one. Yeah, the first one I wrote for children and adults. So it was not specifically only for children.
Okay. Yeah.
But so the first transition was not hard. The second one was very hard. I have seen many. So when I've been listening to many author podcasts, part of many writers groups, which all have discussions on how to write, like your series has. And one of the things they always say is kill your darlings, start and edit down ruthlessly. And the problem was the opposite. How am I going to fill 70,000 words? Because I'm already editing so ruthlessly, I can finish this first draft is 45,000 words. Yeah. Now I've gotten better at it. And what I do is I need to be very careful that if I write non-fiction first, it's very difficult to switch to fiction. So I typically write my fiction early in the morning, the first 2 hours before I begin my work day. Or I close the computer, be done with my work day, go for a long walk in the evening, and then start much later. Or do it on a weekend. So I can't do both kinds of writing. And being a scientist, my work days are such that most often I would do some kind of writing during the work day. So I have to plan it carefully.
Oh, so nice. Climate fiction. Have you tried any climate? It's climate fiction now. You haven't
It's very much on my list. I'm very keen to. So I've been looking at it, and I'm very keen to write an op-ed in a journal on climate fiction for scientists, and to try and talk about why it's very important. I think for us as scientists and teachers to start engaging with climate fiction, because I think it really has a powerful way of conveying to people. I haven't written. I have ideas.
You should. In fact, you should also write climate fiction for children, kids. Climate fiction with pictorial fiction, very nice. Yeah. So tell us about the co-authoring. How is it? What is the experience co-authoring? And what is the experience writing alone on your own?
Seema Mundoli, my co-author, is also a close friend and collaborator. From 2013, we've been working on research together.
Okay.
And because she's such a close friend and collaborator on so many things at the university, she's also a faculty member at my university. We work on teaching programs together, research together, and many things. We know each other's minds very well. And so I think there's that basic level of understanding. I'm right now working on a water book with her, which was commissioned by Penguin. And so we do it differently. So one of us will do a draft of the first one chapter, and the other one do another draft of the other chapter. And then we swap them and we do ruthless edits. And the nice thing with that is because we know each other so well and we're so comfortable with it, you don't have to worry about how the person feels, what you're doing, are you killing their darlings, are you breaking, so we call each other up or we say, I'm going to revise this completely. And usually we know where both of us are coming from. So it's been very easy. What I find very nice about working with her is our imaginations are very complementary.
Okay.
So she spent a lot of time both of us like the idea that to communicate science to people, you also have to communicate emotion. So when we write about trees, for instance, Cities and Canopies, our book on trees, we wrote also about climbing trees, the joy of climbing trees, or recipes. My grandmother's recipe for hair oil from banyan roots is in there. But talks about making jewelry or making children's toys with palm leaves, which she and her brother used to do. So we have poems and riddles, and it's a very multi-sensory kind of book.
Lovely.
And so that ethos comes together, it actually gels together. It's been very nice. I'm not sure I could write with other people. It's one of those things. It's like traveling or something. It can be disastrous if done with the wrong person, but very nice.
You don't argue over something. I mean, okay, you're always thinking on same page and you're doing it. But don't you ever argue?
Argued, no. Disagreed, yes, on certain things.
Okay.
And then eventually we sort of
come to a point.
And then one of us usually convinces. So far, one of us has always convinced the other.
So sweet.
Yeah, we've never had an issue of really being at complete differences.
Nice.
I would like to know how the publishing process of a non-fiction book goes. Like, do you send how are the sample chapters sent, and how did you go through with it? Like, do you contact a literary agent, or how? Like the first book.
Pitch first, synopsis first. What are the process?
How does it happen?
So my first book was Nature in the City. So I'll just show you the photo.
Yes.
So Nature in the City, Bangalore in the past present future. I don't know if you can see it from here. Is it clear in the camera? I can't see it.
Out of focus.
Out of focus, no? I know.
Because I think you've blurred the background.
And now it's yes. Now it's okay. Now it's better.
Okay. So that's Nature in the City. It's based on my own research in Bangalore, which was by then about close to 40-50 scientific publications. So I already had, in that sense, a scientific standing as someone working on the city and well known. And it was to Oxford University Press, which is an academic press. So
Yes.
no, I didn't go through an agent for that one. What I did was I reached out to two colleagues of mine who are scientists and one scientist, one social scientist who were published with Oxford University Press a lot. And they introduced me to the editor saying, here she is and she has this. And what they asked me was for a proposal. I gave them the proposal and then they asked me for, no, it was just a proposal and they asked me to give them 2 paragraphs in every chapter.
Oh.
And I did, and then I just went with writing. So I didn't have to do anything for that. The next one, where Cities and Canopies, we pitched it to Penguin, Seema and I, and again we knew somebody who knew the editor. So that's the first thing we needed, I think, as an introduction to the editor. And then she asked actually for 2 chapters. So Penguin has a different process where they ask you for 2 chapters. And so we gave them the 2 chapters plus the detailed synopsis with that little, 1 paragraph, 2 paragraphs in every chapter. And then they liked it and took it. And after that, now I have seen that even for Oxford University Press and for Penguin, this becomes a standard process where, for instance, the water book we are doing now, Seema and I, is commissioned by Penguin. But even though it was commissioned by Penguin, they still asked us for 2 sample chapters before they could review it and accept it, even though we are Penguin authors before.
So
what about the fiction book?
Okay.
What about the fiction book? How did that process? Like, did you go through the same process?
Yeah. No, it was a completely different process. So the fiction book, one thing is I wanted to publish it simultaneously in different countries. So I was not writing that only for an Indian audience. And also I needed, myself, it was my first fiction book and it's a mystery and I really was struggling with how to conclude that mystery. It took me many years. And my agent is Priya Duraswamy, who is, so Priya was a school friend of mine from Bangalore and now lives in New York and used to be in Singapore before and was one of the first literary agents to take on South Asian representation. Of course, she takes international representation also, but she's from Bangalore. Her sister was my classmate. I knew her very well and she has the same passion for Bangalore that I do. And my book, the fiction book, is all about, it's set in 1920s Bangalore, but a lot of the reason why I write it is to show the beauty of 1920s Bangalore and Bangalore as a city and its history to outside audiences. And Priya got that from the beginning. So I could actually give her my 75% done draft, which I had, I had then a little summary of 3 pages at the end saying this is how I wanted to end, but I'm not able to get from here to the end. And she helped me think through and figure out, she said, this is why you're going wrong. This is why this plot structure is not working. I like the main characters, but this plot is not going to take you to the end. And then she suggested it was set in 1890s Bangalore. She suggested moving it to 1920s, which is a much richer time in terms of the dresses and the jewelry and the clubs and the interface between the Europeans and the Indians. And there's just much more texture which you can pick up the 1920s. And then Indian independence at the backdrop, women's rights for suffrage at the backdrop. So it was a very good idea for us to move it to the 1920s. And that suggestion of what was going wrong was a very good suggestion. So I then rewrote the whole plot, saying, okay, this is not working, let me try something else. And then gave it to her and then edited twice. So after that, it moved very fast. So let's say it took, I met her in 2000, I started thinking of the book in 2007. And I met her in the summer of 2019 when she made a visit to Bangalore. Right? And then by September 2020, it was out with publishers. And then a few weeks after that, we were very lucky because Little Brown took world rights from us. And so then they partnered with Hachette, which is their arm, of course, to do the publication in India. And then Pegasus, which is in the US, bought the publishing rights from them and did the US publishing. So I was very lucky with it just moved very smoothly once I got the book back.
Bringing it to 1920, okay, you can bring the characters and the story to the 1920. What about that research? You must have done research for that period first. Then you may have to start all over again for the research of this period that you're going to shift to, right?
The thing is that because of Nature in the City, that is a book on the ecological history of Bangalore. So I'm anyway surrounded by a lot of the maps and documents and archival material and photographs. And I know this history very intimately because no document will have only pure ecological history. That's actually how the idea of the book started. So I was looking at a lot of documents and there were fascinating things I found and I couldn't write about them because it wasn't ecology. So I would have this tunnel vision saying ecology, 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 collect only ecology, and I kept throwing out all the fun bits which are not ecology.
Okay.
So, yeah, and I actually had much more material from the 1920s.
Mm.
There was so much more documentation there, so much more was written. So
Mm-hmm.
it was very easy for me to take that material and just put it in.
Interesting, interesting.
So
So how much?
though the book
Sorry.
is, yeah, that's okay. You can
You ask,
you
Danya.
continue.
No, you ask.
No, though the book is a fiction, there always will be elements of non-fiction where you have done your research and you will have to make the book sound more authentic, the setting more realistic. So, how did you know where to stop with the non-fiction? Because your mind is already used to having non-fiction all the time. So, how did you know to stop the non-fiction and
True.
come to terms with, let me start the fiction here. Let me fictionalize this and not the other parts.
It is interesting. As an ecologist, obviously, I'm fascinated with the ecology. And as someone who loves food and old recipes, I'm fascinated with writing a lot about the styles of food. For instance, you serve food on a banana leaf. What do you put first on the left side? Why do you start with the salt? Why do you then eat
What's the significance of each one?
The significance. So I wrote in great detail about all of these, and I had fabulous editing from Little Browns. One of the first things they told me was too much food love in the manuscript. So I cut down the then they said this description of ecology is fascinating, but can you make it shorter? So I made it shorter.
Okay.
Then, so it was a balance. I had a lot of history of the clubs of India, clubs of Bangalore, who built it, all of these things. And so I cut it down based on their inputs because they said it's at the end a mystery, it's getting in the way. But it's interesting you're asking me this, Tanya, because now that I'm seeing, they always say you shouldn't read your book reviews on Goodreads and the other places, but I do just for input and feedback. And what I find is some people say that it's too slow, that it has too much description. Some say that they love it for the description. And some say that they wish there was more description because I didn't tell them all these other details about clubs or about other things that I took out. Because it was too long. So I find the whole spectrum, there's some who say I love this book because it has just the right amount of description. As others are saying it's slowing them down because there's too much. Others saying it's too little and I wish there was more. So I'm realizing it's interesting. You can never write to satisfy your readers, and that's very true.
Yeah.
But I think over time one gets better at it.
No, the balance is good enough, I think.
Do read, and all of us do read reviews of our own books. I think all of us, though people say don't, we all read. And I think when you said the book sounded very descriptive was one of the reviews that you had gotten. I remember my book was, in its first few drafts, it was like that. My book was too descriptive. And the only way that I could cut that cycle out was having made it a little, added more dialogues to the book.
Right.
That was the only way I could make it more relatable, less descriptive maybe. Because I'm also like a very technical person, and my brain also works a lot on science than fiction. So I think and my book was historical fiction, so there was so much about history that fascinated me, and I wanted readers to know about it. So I was writing paragraphs and paragraphs of history, which it was not, cut paste history, but my own version of that history. It was fictionalized, but it was like large paragraphs, large chunks of history. So the only way that I could cut that cycle out was by making it dialogues. So I think maybe, if you can, just in your next book, you can,
One thing I've realized, actually two things I've realized, which I've used in the second book. One is if I have a large chunk of description, I break it up. So more than a couple of paragraphs, let's say 1/3 of or maybe half a page at most of description of non-dialogue, let's say, then I put in dialogue. But again, more than a couple of pages of dialogue, I break it up with description. And that I found very useful. And I was listening to Katrina McPherson, who writes a lot of historical fiction. She has this very nice Dandy Gilver series, which is set in Scotland. And I was talking to her once after the Zoom meeting. And then she was saying, so one of the character that she has this very love-hate relationship with her hairdresser, her lady's maid, basically. And also with her butler and her cook. And she said that was the way I could feed in the driblets of information about the clothes, the food, and the house structure. Because I can't keep saying the carpet was like this, the curtain was like this. But if I say I hated the heavy curtains that my husband put and I wanted to put, and I told the butler, we'll try this, and he said, yes, madam, and he moved away, his face was wooden, and I knew he won't touch the curtains. Then you know already that it's a funny way of putting it up, but you can say that there are heavy curtains. So
Exactly,
that's the other thing I'm trying to figure out. So I'm using now supporting characters to try and weave some of these
With
things.
the respective profession, right?
Yeah.
To criticize things
Yeah.
in the setting, right? Interesting. So you said Penguin commissioned your fiction, no, the water.
Non-fiction.
The second non-fiction, not the first.
And then the first one was by
Oxford University.
Yes, Oxford University Press. Was it Mini Krishna? No.
It was Jay, who's now left.
So two of them. So what was the actual duration of the process, the publication process?
Yeah, so both cases we took about a year to write the book.
Okay.
And then it goes to, the Oxford University Press, because it's an academic press, it goes to peer review. So two reviewers read it, give you back comments. It takes about 4 months for that process. Then you review, revise, and send it back. So maybe another 6 months for that round of revisions. And then another 6 to 8 months before the final, you turn in the final typescript and it comes out in press. And they're doing the editing and the cover page and all of those things. Right? And the Penguin, it was much shorter because the review is done by the editor herself. So we did it with Mansi Subramaniam. And she does the reviews herself. And because it's a trade press, then it's not an academic press. So the onus is on us to make sure that it's scientifically credible.
Okay.
And then from the submission of the manuscript and her approval after any revisions, if she gives you a revision, it takes there much faster again, because it's, I think, a process where it doesn't have this level of review. There's no index and all of the other little things that slow down an academic manuscript. It took about 5 months from when we turned in the final typescript.
Okay.
So when you say non-fiction, which form of non-fiction are your books? Because it can be academic essays, it can be I don't know, write-ups. What type of a non-fiction do you mean when you say non-fiction? And
so I've done all kinds. I have 2 edited books that I'm an editor of, and a third one that's coming out. So one is with Springer Verlag, one is with Routledge, and one is an encyclopedia actually with Routledge, and the third one which is coming out will be with Orient Black Swan. Okay, and they are edited essays, which are entries that we really solicit as editors and put them together with a first and a last word. So that's been very different. And I haven't even talked about those because it's a completely different process, edited books. There you send, it's not no agents involved. You send a proposal to the editor, and once they accept it, you reach out to authors, and you're responsible really for the peer review of the author's chapters. So you send it to other academic experts. So that process takes about 2.5 to 3 years, because you have to get the papers, you have to find academic experts who will do the peer review, and then you get them to revise it, and you put all of that together in a very large bundle to the editor, to the publishers, saying that this is the rigorous process that I've followed, and this is why I'm confident that it has high academic value. So there's that. Nature in the City was a book about the ecological history of India by me end to end. An academic book, but they aimed also for an interested expert reader. So journalists read it, architecture students read it, those kinds of design students have read it. So it's semi-scholarly, but also for the interested people who are not necessarily basically ecologists. And that was done. It's a series of chapters all around the idea of nature in the city, on different parts. So one would be on lakes, one would be on parks, one would be on streets. So different facets of that. So there's that. Cities and Canopies and the Water Book that we're doing are trade books, which are just a lot of short chapters, vignettes, and therefore anybody to read. A tree lover can read them and a water lover can read them. And it's designed for dipping in and out. So it's 3-page, 4-page chapters with very nice illustrations, which Penguin could put in.
That's good.
So they make the chapters come alive. Okay. And so the trees one would be some alternate chapters around a species like a banyan tree or a eucalyptus tree. And the others are on a theme, like climbing trees or making jewelry from trees or recipes from trees or something like that.
Who's doing the illustrations?
So they commissioned someone, Alisha Dutt Islam, and that was done. So
You're working with her?
Done. Penguin
Done.
commissioned it.
Oh, it's come out. Okay.
Yeah, this is the cover. This is the lovely cover, and so you can see this. They commissioned the illustrations, and this was done in 2019.
Okay.
And then there is this, which was also done. I don't know. I should have done something with this, but now we're not able to change the Zoom settings.
So many leaves.
So many leaves, which is by Pratham Books, and that is again they commissioned the illustrations. It's a children's book.
Okay.
And that's on the idea. It's for very young children. It's a picture book talking about there are leaves that are big and small. There are leaves that are hairy and smooth, or bitter and sweet. And why are they like this? It's just for children to explore and learn about. So it's very difficult to answer, Tanya. It's all kinds of books. When I say non-academic, it's a real range of things.
Yes, you have written a wide range, like non-fiction, fiction, and for the children also, same leaves. That's very interesting. So I wanted to know, you have been into doctorate and postdoctorate and all. You're so easy in waiting, right? So did that help you in waiting for the publication process also?
I got impatient, I must say, for the fiction book, because when I turned it into Little Brown, we finalized the typescript last year in February, and it was published in April this year. So I couldn't. Of course, now I get a sense of the publication process in foreign presses does take 12 to 14 months, and they have a very long and therefore very elaborate and well-defined process, right? Cover, page, and everything. But I wasn't. So I was very impatient then. But so the one thing it is not so much the patience, but the reviews. Because any academic book goes through peer review, which is anonymous peer review. My papers, for instance, I've written over 200 academic papers. They will go to two completely anonymous people who give you feedback. Sometimes the feedback is good. Sometimes it's savagely. I mean, it's always good, but sometimes it's rendered very savagely. And not at all kindly. People will say things like, you're trying to squeeze blood from a stone, or this is terrible. And it's luck of the draw. All academics get this. So you become a little thick-skinned. You learn to see that if I'm happy with it, I'm happy with it. And it's not so much, I take the feedback that I feel will improve it, but I'll discard the feedback that I feel is not relevant. And I think having that thick skin is very useful when you become a writer who puts stuff out there for the public.
I understand. Right. So when you're waiting, do you go? I mean, you're waiting, yes, but do you go on to your next work so that the waiting is not so difficult? So,
for instance, now I'm editing book 2 of my fiction book series, which is Murder Under a Red Moon. The final edits are going on. I'm also writing my water book for Penguin, which is the commission book, which is due in 1st November. And I'm trying to figure out how to revise a new series. So I wrote a first draft of a new book set in contemporary Bangalore, which is also a murder mystery. And I'm trying to figure out at the same time in the back of my head how I'm supposed to revise it. So again, I sent it to Priya, my agent, and she gave me very good suggestions about 6 months ago. And I said, let me just think, because I didn't have the time then. I was working on book 2 of my series. So now I'm thinking about what I want to do. So
what is this water book about, Harini? What?
So the water book is about water in Indian cities. Okay. And from a variety of different perspectives. First, it will have some cities themselves as vignettes. So water in Bombay, Calcutta, Bangalore, Delhi. Why these cities are built on water and around water, and why that's so important for the future of the cities. And then it has a number of things. Water as transport. Then the chapter I'm writing now is fantastical beasts and mythical water monsters in cities. In water. Across the world. So all about those, And the chapter that I wrote yesterday was on something completely different. It could be on antibiotic resistance in rivers, which is becoming a great problem for us in cities. Drug companies throw out their drugs into rivers, and then you get antibiotic resistance bacteria, which means if tomorrow any of us have to go to the ICU, you have a chance of getting infected with one of these drug resistant bacteria.
Yeah. So is there a chapter on nanoplastics and nanoplastic waste?
Actually, there is not waste, but now you're absolutely right. I need to add a large section on nanoplastics because that's such a big topic right now. Yeah. I'll work this in our chapter as I start editing it.
Yeah. I think we can log off now. I'll just send you the link immediately. There's just like 4. Yeah. Coming to the mystery book, which is a fiction, I would like to know, there are most people, it's like mystery will always be in trend. Most people will always pick mystery over any other genre of fiction. So why did you want to go into that particular form of fiction? There are like varied forms of fiction anyway. It's not like, did you want to follow the trend, or did you just feel like, you just had that
Especially
story?
from whatever she does,
Exactly.
in
Yeah.
So
So I wanted to see the main protagonist is this young woman Kaveri, who is actually she was Bhagirathi when she first dropped into my head, but her character stayed.
okay, Kaveri water. Okay.
Yeah. So she was feisty, young, very feminist in her attitudes, even though she was a century back and she was dealing with oppressive systems and wanted to forge ahead. So it was clear to me that she would be the centerpiece of the story. And I love mysteries and I love fantasy. And you asked me about climate fiction. So the other kind of genre I would like to write in at some point is fantasy. And so I want to write in these two genres and non-fiction. If I think of myself, let's say 10 years from now, where would I like to see myself? I think writing in all of these things. But this is it. So if I wrote, it would be either in fiction or in fantasy. And this book was so solidly set in a real setting of 1920s Bangalore, it couldn't be fantasy, which meant it had to be mysteries. I love mysteries, and I love golden age mysteries, this time between the World War I and II, and Agatha Christie type settings. And so that was very clear for me that it would be that kind of a book.
Okay.
it was very intentional that it was a mystery book.
I couldn't think of writing anything else. I wouldn't write my short stories, which I told you I got published in a literary magazine, is more literary fiction. But I can't think for me of sustaining that style over an entire book. That's just not how I write. So I love reading them, but that's not how I write. So for me, mystery is a much more, especially, and it's a light-hearted mystery. It's not one of your, thrillers. I love reading thrillers, but that's not my style. It's very much a more cozy mystery or a domestic type of mystery.
Domestic. Okay. What's the work in progress, Harini?
So the work in progress is Murder Under a Red Moon. It's part 2. Little Brown took a 3-part series from this, and I'm hoping they'll actually take more. But the second book, so the first book, Kaveri has just got married, and it's her and her husband really trying to figure out their own relationship to each other and solving the murder. And her mother-in-law is the thorn in the flesh, because she's the person who provides the conflict, because Kaveri moves in, and mother-in-law is very traditional. Kaveri loves maths, wants to study, and her mother-in-law doesn't approve of, women from respectable houses, according to her, are not supposed to do all this sleuthing or wanting to do mathematics or study or teach other women how to study and all of that. So in the second book, the mother-in-law comes in. In the first book, what I did was she was there for the first 1/3, and then she was going to get in the way. So I conveniently sent her off to look after a sick relative. And the second book is a mystery, which was not intended to be a murder, but her mother-in-law brings it to her to solve because of a relative. And then it becomes a murder. And so her mother-in-law is dragged in, and Kaveri and her mother-in-law have to figure out how to coexist in the same house. And will they get along? Will they find some ways to navigate this difficult relationship, or is it going to become much worse? That's the side theme. While they develop the murder, the side theme is figuring out this. Because in any South Asian house, you don't just marry your husband, right? You marry
the family.
And so figuring out those relationships are very important. And so I wanted to give, especially the foreign readers, a flavor of how that is. How to
How has social media helped in promoting your books? All your books.
For me? Yeah. So I'll say hugely, especially so I wasn't on social media per se for my first book. And then I got onto Twitter a little bit before Cities and Canopies. And now I'm on it quite a bit, actually. So LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and I find I post pretty much the same thing on all 4, but I find different audiences are receptive to different things. So it's very interesting to understand the differences in so Cities and Canopies and the current book, the Bangalore Detectives Club, I found that Instagram has taken off hugely for both of them. And especially, for instance, there are so many book bloggers now. And so book bloggers have taken it up in such a big way. It's very, very nice. Sometimes in the first 3 months or so, sometimes 2-3 times a day, people would post their own blogs about the book and sometimes little reels where they would dress up or put little montages of images together for the book, and that would be great fun. So it's something I like doing, but I won't say I put a lot of attention. I'm not very systematic. I do what I like. So I will post a few things a week, but whatever I feel like posting really. If there's a review, I'll post it. But otherwise, I just put up something or I don't. But it's been useful, helping me reach other audiences. But I won't say that I also recognize that social media can be very obsessive, especially because I'm a teacher and I see the students interacting with it. So I'm very careful. It doesn't suck me in.
You cannot be too much in the social media because you cannot scold them later, right?
See, I don't have social media on my phone, for instance, Anya. So I found that I'll end up giving my eyes problems. Because I'll end up looking at this and I have to respond very quickly. Someone's tagged me, I feel the impulse, I should respond very soon. And I have to say, it's fine. If I'm 24 hours late, I'll do it on my computer because I'm also aging. I've hit 50 and I need to make sure my eyes work into the future so I can read and write more books.
Everyone is having that problem. Eyes are the, yeah.
So I think we can transition to the next segment of this
episode. One question that she really wanted. So what are the other projects that you have in plan, future projects? You said 10 years from now, it will be fantasy, right? So what are the immediate projects that are waiting for you?
So the book the contemporary book on murder set in contemporary Bangalore, that is one I want to finish. I am thinking of another historical series set in 16th century in India, in a very different part of India. So North India is what I'm thinking of. And that is something I'm really mulling in my mind because I have to do completely new research on that period. So, and the period, the context, and all of that. So I want to do something there. And my idea is maybe it's something that has a lot of ecology in it with that landscape. So again, I just a lot of research before I can formulate that. So that's on the fiction side. Ideally, I would at some point like to write these 3 series, that go alongside. That said, I'm also still writing non-fiction, So I'm doing a lot of research with my husband on the KRS Dam, which is Karnataka's oldest dam, Mysore State's oldest dam in the 1910s and 1920s. And so we want to write an ecological history of the dam, and we've been putting together material for that and started some field work, but COVID came in the way. So maybe in the next year or 2, we would like to get that out. And it's also been a fun collaboration to do something with him, So both of us with the interest in ecology to do that together. So we'll see.
Your husband is also an ecologist, is it?
He's a physicist, his PhD in physics, but he's done a lot of work on ecology, and he's also an adjunct faculty at the Nature Conservation Foundation. So he does a lot of work with ecology.
Okay. So it will be co-authored by you both?
Yeah, that's the plan.
Lovely.
Yeah, so
all the best. All the best. Lovely.
I think now it's time for us to go to the next segment of the episode, which is World of W's. World of W's is nothing but W questions like what, when, where, all that, and it is almost like a like a crisp rapid fire round where if an audience member could not listen to the entire episode, they can just scroll down here and get a gist of it. The first question I would like to ask is, when is your next book due? Both fiction, just give us like a tentative date of both the fiction and the non-fiction.
So Murder Under Red Moon in March 23, and in April or May 23, the water book.
Oh, you're very clear about it. I like that. And then, how many drafts do you do, Harini, for fiction or non-fiction? I mean, of course, it varies from book to book, but
Average.
Generally, your
3 to 5 drafts.
Oh, okay. That's brilliant.
Where can our audience find your books? Is it available on Amazon, Flipkart, and where can they find you?
So all the standard bookstores, Amazon, Flipkart, any of the other independent bookstores in India or in the UK and the US, because they're all available everywhere. They can find me on my website, www.harininagendra.com. Is my personal website, and the university website, if they Google me, the first thing that pops up is my university website if they want to know about my academic work. So it really depends on what they're looking for. The personal website will have my fiction work, And then on Twitter as at Harini Nagendra. And on Instagram is harini.nagendra.
Which is the most toughest genre for you to write? I mean, you've done children's, you've done fiction, non-fiction, research book. Which one do you love the most, and which is the toughest for you?
So I love the most the fiction, and the hardest to write is also the fiction, because when I start it's writing. When it's non-fiction, it's based on, I feel like I'm building this matrix of the book on a structure, on a skeleton.
It's all there, but you're just composing them.
And often it's my own research, or it's an area I really know. I've been doing ecology for 30 years now, so I feel very confident in that. And when I start with a fiction book, it's like creating this edifice out of cloth, and I wonder if it's going to crumble and collapse. It's very exciting. It's also the most fun I'm having.
I know. We both are fiction people. We love reading fiction, writing fiction. So, yeah.
Has there been any particular, book that you wrote, be it fiction or non-fiction, which you took a really long time to get your mind out of? Like you had been like living that book for a really long time and you couldn't get your mind out of that book.
Nature in the City, the Bengaluru, that's my first book, which is ecological history, partly because it's still something I work on, but I think Bangalore for me is a real living creature. I just love the city and the ecology. So even today, you ask me something, I know in chapter 9 and the 3rd page, I wrote this and let me go find it. And it's almost uncanny. I know where that sentence is in the book.
Oh my God.
And, I think I know that book far better than the others. I just poured heart and soul into that.
Got it. Has your profession as a teacher, even as a non-fiction writer, has it helped you in writing fiction? Forget the publishing process, forget the usual stuff, like it has built your vocabulary. Apart from that, what else has it helped you with writing fiction?
Discipline of time management. I am very good at doing multiple things at the same time. I don't have writer's block. I can't afford to have writer's block because I have to work to deadlines, some kind of writing deadline constantly. So yes, I mean, I can, for instance, the second fiction book, I was very much behind on deadlines because my mother who lives with me was unwell. And so, 4 months she was in the ICU in and out, and it's fine now, thank God. But, I couldn't write. And so I was so behind. I had 2 months to complete this first draft of Murder Under a Dead Moon. And I did it in those 2 months while working full time, and my mother and my teenage daughter at home. And so I can do that. I can say this chunk of 2 hours, I'm only going to do this, and then I'll move on to something else. And I think that's what the academic part of it has taught me.
Salutes.
I hope after saying all this, it's going to crumble and I'll have writer's block for the next book.
No, we hope not. We do not wish that.
No, it won't. Yeah, it won't come.
So yeah, I think that's all. That's a wrap for our session, and we would like to know how you felt about the session, and if you have any parting words for aspiring authors who would like to write both fiction and non-fiction.
I think so. The session was fun. It's been great to hear your questions and to have actually both of your inputs for the water book also. So straight away, I think that's going to go into my next book. In terms of writing, my inputs, I think the best piece of advice I got was finish the first book. Because I think each of us have our own writing style. Some people will say you have to write every day. Some people say write when the inspiration strikes. Some people say plot. Some people say just start and keep writing. I think it's more a question of what works for each of us, because it's something magical going on in our own heads, and it has to work with our head. And the way each of us is going to think, it's not going to be the way the other thinks. So you have to finish your first book. I somehow now, in a way, it was meant to be that I took that many years to finish my first fiction book. But if I had done it earlier, I wish I just pushed myself to that finishing line, which I always do with my non-fiction books. But I think that my only advice for aspiring writers is finish that first book. Even if it's rough, badly written, you can always revise it, but you can't revise something you haven't written. You need to understand your own structure of writing. And so you have to write for that.
That's very practical also. It's true.
Yeah. Thank you.
Very nice.
Stopping the recording.
Thank you, Harini.
Thank you.
Thank you.